I'm reading a fascinating book at the moment. It's this one, Islam and Politics, Islamic Political Principles and Their Practical Implementation. So, who is Mufti Usmani? According to the blurb on the back, he is one of the world's most prominent scholars of the Islamic sciences and former Justice of the High Court of Pakistan. Born in Deoband, India in 1943, which of course was British India at that time, he studied with leading ulama, that means Islamic scholars, in Karachi and elsewhere. His main fields of expertise are hadith, jurisprudence, and economics, finance. Mufti Usmani has published numerous works in Urdu, Arabic, and English on the subject of Islamic studies. This book has an introduction by Prince Ghazi of Mohammed, which is quite useful. So I just want to read some extracts from it because the Islamic perspective on the relationship between Islam and politics is quite distinctive and quite different from that of secular democracy in the West. And it's useful to understand it from such an authoritative and knowledgeable source. He writes at the beginning of chapter 1, the subject is the relation between Islam and politics and the place of politics in Islam. The first thing to be said is that nowadays views about the relation between Islam and politics on the subject are polarized between two extreme positions, he writes. One is that of secularism, that's the political system we have in the West, here in France and Britain and America and so on, according to which Islam is, like religion in general, a personal matter concerning only the individual and no one else, and that politics and government have nothing to do with it. This kind of thinking was adopted as a reaction to the evils of the Christian form of theocracy. If you look at the history of medieval Europe and the reaction against that in later centuries. In 1789, of course, in France, it overthrew the church and established a militantly secularist regime, which is still in power today. He continues, once secular democracy became popular in many parts of the world, this kind of thinking also found acceptance. It was further strengthened by the activities of some religious circles who, instead of concentrating on the reform of their own character and deeds and engaging in acts of worship and the like, became the focal point of criticism when they began to engage in political activities as well. It raised many an eyebrow that a religious person should participate in politics. Perish the thought. This viewpoint stemmed from comparing Islam with other religions, although such an analogy, he writes, is absolutely wrong. The teachings of Islam are not limited to beliefs, worship, and moral concerns. It has in fact provided us with invaluable injunctions regarding financial questions as well as matters of politics and government. Without these guidelines and principles, the holistic concept of Islam would be incomplete. Some aspects of the injunctions in question will be discussed below, inshallah. The book is about this, obviously. The second extreme view is that of some of those who make every effort to refute secularism and, as a result, declare politics to be the absolute objective of Islam. Now, I'm aware of a particular group called Hizbut Tahrir, which is a global movement to restore the caliphate, but for them, politics seems to be the objective for them when it comes to advancing Islam. According to them, he doesn't name Hizbut Tahrir, but I'm mentioning them. The purpose of Islam is to establish a just political system all over the world, and all the other injunctions of Islam are meant to serve this end. Hence, a person who engages in politics so that Islam may prevail is serving the true purpose of Islam. And those who engage in other things like purification of the soul, preaching, dawah, reformation of society, etc., are not involved in politics, are myopic and oblivious to the actual purpose of Islam. Both of these views, our author says, are extreme, and they stem from an incorrect perception of the role politics plays in Islam. In reality, the teachings and injunctions of Islam relate to every aspect of life, including politics. But it is wrong to say that politics is the actual purpose of Islam and that all injunctions and teachings are meant only to serve that purpose. This can be illustrated through an example. Islam has laid down very detailed guidelines and instructions about trade, but it would be absolutely wrong to say that trade is the actual purpose of Islam. Similarly, Islam has laid down many guidelines concerning marriage, but the mere fact that there are many detailed guidelines does not mean that marriage is the actual purpose of Islam. So the fact that Islam has laid down basic guidelines and injunctions about politics does not mean that politics is the actual purpose of Islam. End quote. So that's very interesting, very interesting. Now, he comes in the second chapter to my mind, the most radical and concept in Islam that differentiates itself from Western conceptions of government. And this is the Islamic concept of government itself. And I'll read that through, but it is so different from contemporary Western theories, political theories, although it is quite similar to ancient Western political theories, but I'll come to that in a second. He says, one cannot fully understand the injunctions and guidelines Islam has given about politics and government until one has a correct understanding of the concept of government. And this is really foundational and of fundamental importance, I think, and he says the same. The first is, in the first part of our talks, this was, by the way, given as a series of lectures in Urdu originally, before it was translated into English and put in book form, we analysed various philosophers' theories about the beginning and the purpose of government. The concept of government in Islam is not like any of those theories, and without understanding it properly, one cannot properly understand the basis of the Islamic principles and injunctions regarding politics. I'll come to actually how the West does understand this concept in its own history in a second. He doesn't mention this, but I'm going to mention it in a second. So the foundation of the Islamic concept, sovereignty belongs to Allah. So this is the fundamental concept, that sovereignty, political sovereignty, all sovereignty belongs to God. The most important and basic principle is that Allah is the true sovereign of this universe. In other words, the whole cosmos and all that is in it. Worldly rulers rule only as a consequence of this sovereignty and in subservience. Wow. This is the basic principle which allows neither any difference of opinion nor ijtihad of any kind, nor can it be ignored in any instance, nor can there be any negotiations on this point. This is the first and most fundamental article of an Islamic constitution, which has been stated more than once by the Holy Qur'an in clear and unambiguous terms. And then he cites a few verses from the Qur'an. One, for example, is Surah number 657. In English it says, "Truly all sovereignty belongs to Allah." And another one, "So remember, to him belong all sovereignty." That's 662. And "Truly his is the creation and the ultimate command." 754. And to Allah belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth. 3189. And say, "O Allah, owner of all dominion, you gave dominion to whomever you will." 326. So powerful, powerful verses in the Quran. All these ayah show that sovereignty over the whole universe belongs to Allah alone. Secular democracy, however, presumes that the right to rule belongs to the people, us. Rulership or government means having the right to make decisions and issue edicts without being dependent on anyone else. That right belongs to no one but Allah. If one considers anyone else as the ruler in this sense, one will be guilty of having ascribed partners to God. The actual meaning of theocracy is that rule belongs to God, he writes. But as has already been mentioned, in Judaism, Christianity, and Hinduism, there was no proper way of implementing this concept, so it often degenerated into unbridled rule by religious leaders. In consequence, no one thinks of the rule of God when he thinks of the word theocracy. What comes to mind instead is rule by religious leaders. Theocracy has been translated as rule by religious leaders in Urdu books on politics. But to give religious leaders the status of real rulers instead of Allah is the worst form of associating partners with him. The Holy Qur'an severely rejects it. Quote, "They have taken their rabbis and priests as lords besides Allah." That's Surah 9:31. Hence, the most fundamental principle underlying Islamic politics is to acknowledge that the ultimate ruler is Allah, God. This has nothing to do with rule by religious leaders, which Christianity adopted in the name of theocracy, and which became so notorious that people now do not even want to hear its name. Very true, particularly in France. In Islam, on the other hand, the rule of God has kept its proper meaning. Its obvious implication is that whatever commands and guidelines Allah Most High has sent to man, whether in the form of the Holy Qur'an or noble hadiths, are the first and foremost sources on which an Islamic government is to rely. The government is not permitted to make a law that contravenes them, or to take any steps that do not conform to these guidelines. So just stopping the book and coming to myself here for a second, in the West it's law now in many, many places that gay marriage is honoured and accepted in society, in constitutions like in the US and in France and Britain. In an Islamic system that would never be possible because the commands and guidelines that are followed come from God himself, not from the thoughts of an electorate who can change right and wrong as they please from day to day. So there's a big difference there in the governmental and ruling systems. So to continue with the book, in short, the acknowledgement that ultimate sovereignty belongs to God is what distinguishes Islamic politics from secular democracy. In the latter, the parliament or other national assembly, Congress, Senate, in its capacity as a public representative body, has the power to enact any law it likes. If the constitution of a country restricts the legislative powers of its parliament, the parliament can remove those restrictions by amending the constitution, as it did in America recently when it amended the US Constitution to permit gay marriage, which had hitherto not been permitted. The constitutional basis of an Islamic government, however, are the Holy Qur'an and the Sunnah, and they are unalterable. They cannot be changed, according to this writer. There can be no law or article in the Constitution that does not conform to them. It's unchanging forever. When recounting the history of different fields of human intellectual activity, Western writers often fail to mention the contributions made by Muslims. This is an interesting point. In the case of political science, they begin with Plato and Aristotle, and then come to the Christian era, then skip a few centuries and come to Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. There is no mention of the long era of Islamic governments in which a different concept of politics was presented. As for political systems of religious origin, they mention only the theocracy of Jews, Christianity, and Hinduism. There is no mention of how Islam has made the concept of Allah being the ultimate ruler the basis of its politics, or of what was the foundation of the righteous caliphate or subsequent Islamic governments. This is the outcome of the prejudice the West has towards Islam and Muslims. Intellectual integrity and honesty, however, require that at the very least one would mention the Islamic concept of politics, even if only as a theory, and the governments that were established according to that concept. It's a good point, because there have been Islamic governments in Europe, in Spain, in Islamic Spain, for 700-800 years. And in other parts of Southeast Europe, there have been Muslim governments, the Ottoman Empire, for many, many centuries. So that's a valid point, I think. Now, I'm just basically cherry-picking bits here that I just wanted to highlight. This video will go on for hours, and that's not going to happen. On page 45, he says something very interesting. Apart from that, citizens of most secular democratic countries, i.e. France, Britain, Germany, etc., are, in matters of personal law, judged by one and the same law, regardless of their religion. Now, this is a point here he's making to differentiate how more diverse and pluralist the Islamic government is compared to Western governments. And this may sound, how can this be true? But he gives the examples, which are very real. So, just to repeat, citizens of most secular democratic countries are, in matters of personal law, judged by the same law, regardless of their religion. This means that in matters of marriage, divorce, inheritance, and testaments, many people are forced to act against the requirements of their religion. That is, on the one hand, secularism claims that in it everyone is free to act according to his religion, but in practice, that matters of marriage, divorce, inheritance, testaments, and so on, followers of a certain religion are not free to practice their religion. Followers of a certain religion meaning Muslims, but also that applies to Orthodox Jews to some extent as well. In Western countries, people are forced to abide by the laws of the country in these matters, even if these are not according to their religion. This too, he writes, is gross injustice. What about Islam? Surely Islam forces everyone to have the same rules as well. No. On the other hand, he writes, an Islamic government gives the followers of different religions to practice their religion in these matters. It has been said, and he quotes here an authority, leave them be to act according to their religion. So under Islamic government, Christians and Jews and others are free to organise their affairs in these matters according to their own wishes. Now, I'm going to leave it there, I think, or just one final point. There's a big section on the principles of forming an Islamic government, and there's some really distinctive principles involved here which are completely alien to contemporary Western discourse in politics. One, for example, is that it's not permissible to seek a ruling position. So if I was in a Muslim country and I wanted to seek to be a ruler, a caliph, that would not be permitted. You cannot seek power for yourself. And indeed, he quotes hadith where Muhammad, upon whom be peace, said, do not ask for leadership, for if you are given it because of having asked for it, you will be left in sole charge of it. But if you are given it without asking, you will be held in it by Allah. So you're supposed to be appointed, you don't seek it, you don't seek to grab power for yourself. There are many other principles of forming a government, which I won't go into now, maybe in a separate video, because this will go on for hours, as I say. Anyway, I do highly recommend this book. It's absolutely fascinating. And according to Prince Ghazi, in the introduction, it's the best introduction in English for sure on the subject of Islam and politics, and possibly the best of its kind in Arabic too, and he would know. Anyway, till next time.